and welcome to the Leniverse. It is that time of year again when we try and mostly fail to predict the long lists of various book prizes. I am only going to attempt the Women's Prize for Fiction. It's the only one where I feel marginally competent to even try to guess, and it has taken me a lot of moving books off and back on my list, and then off again when I discovered that they're not eligible after all, because the date I was looking at was the US release date. Or in one very specific case where I couldn't actually work out if the book, which had a US publisher but a UK imprint, if it actually had general distribution and a UK ISBN number. So if anyone out there knows how you can tell if there is a US number or a UK number, please share the secret with me. But at any rate, I reached a point where I just had to draw the line. Am I feeling confident in my list? No, not really. But it's my list, and at this point, I'll just have to stand by it. Last year, I think I managed to predict 3 books. And this year, I have only 2 that I'm feeling relatively confident about. And the first one is the obligatory Booker book. There's always some overlap between the Booker Prize and the Women's Prize for Fiction. And this year there are 4 books from last year's Booker that are eligible. Those books are Enlightenment by Sarah Perry, This Strange Eventful History, or as some would say, This Boring Uneventful History by Claire Messon, Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, and The Safekeep by Yael van der Woeden. Personally, I am sad that Stoneyard Devotional isn't eligible, but out of these 4, surely, it must be The Safekeep. So these are the books I'm not going to talk about, and I'm going to not say much about The Safekeep either. It is set in the 1960s in the Netherlands, and the less you know about it going in, the better. Now, if you, like me, are from the European continent, and by that I mean the mainland, not the British Isles, because they have a completely different historical background or understanding. But if you are from Europe and you're not entirely a youngster, then you will likely work out where the book is going already in the first chapter. And so you won't have that shock, wow experience when you do work it out, or later on in the book when things are revealed. But even so, it is a good story, and I was very engaged and wanted to know how it would all play out in the end. My list has a total of 6 books that I have read and that I think stand a good chance of being on the list. Well, some are higher chance than others. And then the remaining 10 books are for the most part books that I would like to read, so it would be very convenient if they were on the long list, because that means I will actually get around to reading them. So first you have The Safekeep, and then the second book that I am feeling quite confident about is There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak. Shafak has been shortlisted before. That book, I think it was in 2021, a book about an olive tree. I've forgotten what it's called now. I think it had tree in the title. But anyway, There Are Rivers in the Sky is, in my opinion, better than the book that was shortlisted. So I just don't see any way that this book cannot be longlisted. The book has multiple timelines and locations, and 3 main characters that are tied together by 1 drop of water and a smidgen of magical realism, and a stone tablet. No, actually not a stone tablet, more of a gemstone tablet, containing a fragment of the Epic of Gilgamesh. This sounds maybe a bit messy, but it really works. All 3 storylines have interesting, likable characters that you will feel for and fear for. And I at least learned something about very recent history and a population group that I barely knew existed. I simply cannot think of any combination of 16 books that would justify leaving this book off the list. Next up I have The Echoes by Evie Wilde. This book is set partially in London and partially in rural Australia. It has an interesting narrative style where it cycles through 4 different types of chapters. There is after and before an event. There is then, which is backstory, and then there are named chapters that gives part of the story and more insights from various side characters. And the before and after event is the death of one of the characters. This is not a spoiler, it's actually right there in the very first page, very first line of the book. The after part is narrated by a ghost, who is a bit miffed about being a ghost because he doesn't believe in ghosts. That said, this is not really a book about the supernatural, this is more of a narrative device. After finishing the book, I did have a couple of, I wouldn't call them complaints, but certainly issues. But I don't think that detracts from this book. It's more like I wanted to track down somebody else who has also read the book so that I could discuss those issues with them. Which is definitely a good thing for a long list book. The 4th book on my list I wasn't quite sure about. I had a bit of a standoff between this book, which is Blue Sisters by Coco Melrose, and Shy Creatures by Claire Chambers. Not because they are that similar, although they are a bit. Something about them felt a bit similar, even though the narrative is quite different. In the end, I ended up with Blue Sisters mostly because I didn't have enough American books. There's always a good amount of books from the US on the long list, and I guess it got quoted in. That said, I enjoyed Blue Sisters quite a lot when I read it. I always like a messy, dysfunctional family story. And here we have 4 sisters, but we enter the book 1 year after the death of one of them to see how the other 3 sisters are coping. And very often in these dysfunctional family stories, the tension is between parents and children. In this case, the parents are so dysfunctional that they are completely peripheral characters. And the story is all about the sisters and the different sibling dynamic between them, and the different ways in which they all feel that they have been affected more by the death of the 4th sister. And while it is difficult to say what a typical Women's Prize book is, this at least seems like the kind of potential Women's Prize book that could very well end up on the list. The 5th book is one that I didn't actually like, but I think it has a good chance of being on the list. The reason is that it deals with a women's issue that has been very much neglected. And it is, I do apologize, it is maybe a little bit of a spoiler to say this, but you do find out at some point in the book, both you and the main character finds out that she is suffering from perimenopause. Yes, that's right, not menopause, perimenopause. And if you haven't heard of that before, you are in good company. It is something that most women don't hear about until they are in the middle of it. And the way that they then find out is normally from a friend, not from their GP. From a friend or from Googling their strange collection of symptoms, trying to work out what is going on. And for that reason, I think that All Fours by Miranda July might be on the list, might even deserve a place on the list. When I say I didn't like it, it's because it tries to be wacky funny in a way that I didn't find funny, and because the main character is, I think, not the representation that women my age deserve. She is such a stereotype of oblivious privilege, and that makes her both unlikable and unrelatable. So while I am very for the topic, I didn't like the execution of it. Okay, finally, of the books that I have read, I'm going to come in with a bit of a long shot. I consider it a long shot because I think books are supposed to be well written, and which it is, and original, which it also is, but also accessible. And it might fall down a little bit on the accessibility criteria, because this book is a bit strange. But the Women's Prize has been known to embrace the strange as well. Personally, I am very fond of strange. Portraits at the Palace of Creativity and Wrecking by Han Smith. Every chapter is written as a portrait, in a sense, where you get descriptions of a scene and what the characters are doing and saying. But the way that it's written gives you a bit of distance to everything, which is completely deliberate. And the main character doesn't even have a name, she's just the almost daughter. And I never quite worked out why she considers herself an almost daughter. It's a coming-of-age story where the almost daughter is torn between wanting to know about the past and all the things that you're not supposed to talk about, because it's considered unpatriotic. But she also wants to be completely normal and to be liked. Classic teenage problem. And because there are things that you do not talk about, that might even be dangerous to think about, the almost daughter is finding it very difficult to speculate and to think about certain things, which also makes it difficult for the reader. Each chapter also has an epitaph that tells you or gives you a sort of a hint about the chapter or the portrait. But about halfway through the book, these start to become written in not just a different language, but also a different alphabet. And me being slightly obsessive like that, ended up sitting at the computer with like a keyboard converter and various electronic dictionary automatic translation things, trying to find out what these epitaphs said. We only have as much fun as we make, right? I thought this book was excellent. I haven't heard too much about it. And for a moment I hesitated, because this book has been published by John Murray and they have several books that could be good candidates. And I almost went with a book called The Artist instead, which is, I think, not out yet, but there's so much hype around it, I got a bit caught up in that. But then I thought every year contains a bunch of books that no matter how much research I do, I have never heard of them. So maybe it makes more sense to go with that book that I know is really good, that people don't speak about, instead of the book that I haven't read, so I don't actually know how good it is, but everybody speaks of it. And also I have another book on the list later on that deals with the art world, so I decided to skip The Artist and go with portraits. And that brings us to the books that I haven't read. Some of these I really, really want to read. Others is more like, hey, if they are longlisted, I'll read them, and if not, I probably won't. But obviously they're all books that I think might be on the long list. Let's start with a book that I really, really want to read. The Lost Love Songs of Boise Sing by Ingrid Pannor. This is a book that everybody's been raving about, so kind of the opposite of my previous choice, I guess. And it's about not really Boise Sing, from how I understand it, though he is a very charismatic gangster. But the book is about 4 women who have been involved with Boise Sing in some way or another. 4 women connected and controlled by one man, and the story of how they survived. And that, combined with all the praise that the book has received, is really all I want to know before reading it. My next pick is maybe more of a long shot again. I do like the long shots. This book is coming out early next month, and it's called Fundamentally, written by Nusaiba Yunis. And the book is inspired, I think, partially on her own experiences as working either for the UN or for some NGO, and also I think partly by the fate of Shamina Begum. If you are British, that name might ring a bell, and if you're not, then maybe it won't. But Begum was a 15-year-old girl in the UK who was groomed online and ended up travelling to Syria to join the Islamic State. British authorities knew about this because they had surveillance tracking British citizens who became radicalized. I think this is an important point, because a lot of people say that she got what was coming to her. But bear in mind, she was 15 years old. She was groomed, she went to Syria, where she was given to a soldier as a child bride. Something that could have easily been prevented. Later, at the age of 18 or 19, she had become a widow and she had a newborn baby, also British citizen by descent, and she wanted to return to the UK. The British government responded by revoking her citizenship. Her baby died. Shamina was married off to somebody else. She is still in a detention camp in Syria, now with another baby and another husband. And she has lost her appeal to regain her British citizenship. So fundamentally, it's not her story, but it is inspired by the stories of girls like her. It is a political satire. A British Muslim woman gets recruited by the UN to go to Syria to help rehabilitate ISIS brides. If the satire is even half as sharp as I expect, and if the book is only half as good as I hope, then this is a book that I think people should read, dealing with a problem that most people have never thought of. Okay, on to something completely different. Madame Matisse by Sophie Haydock. This book, also to be published soon, follows 3 women from the life of the French artist Henri Matisse. We follow his wife, who is very much the woman behind the man, who has done quite a lot to further his career. And we follow a young Russian refugee trying to make a life for herself on the French Riviera. And we also follow the daughter of Henri Matisse, who is torn between conflicting loyalties to each of her parents as their lives implodes. So, art, drama, the French Riviera. Sounds delicious. Book number 11 is This Motherless Land by Nikki May. This is built as sort of a decolonial retelling of Mansfield Park. I'm pretty sure you don't have to have read Mansfield Park before. It is perhaps the most dreary of Jane Austen's novels, but it's also, and this might be of interest, the book where she very subtly tackles attitudes to the slave trade and shows how British families profited and thrived on the slave trade. But the source of their money must never be spoken of. The moral implications of it must never be spoken of. And any attempt at doing so would be met with strong censor. And in this modern sort of retelling, we follow a young girl from Nigeria who, after a family tragedy, is sent to England to live with her aunt and uncle and her cousin. And the book deals with identity, culture, race, love, and the possibility of correcting generational wrongs. Book 12 is Passion Tide by Monique Raffi. And this book apparently sort of reinvents the crime novel. Carnival has just ended on a Caribbean island, and several women turn up murdered. Female musicians turn up murdered. In fact, the murder of women is such a big problem on this island that the police has a special unit set up to try to deal with it. But it is not enough. And 4 very different women from very different backgrounds team up to try to find out what is going on and put a stop to it, and maybe just spark off a sort of revolution. It sounds like one of those books that's both funny and bleak at the same time. Hey, this is Editing Leni. I had just finished putting the little book thumbnails onto the video when I realized that I had one over. It seems that Past Me forgot to talk about book number 10. Yes, book number 10. So I'm here to do that now. And if I manage to do this right, I will have inserted myself in between book number 9 and book number 11. Although I also noticed that Past Me did not actually mention the number for every book, so as long as I manage to place myself after the initial 6, but before the Irish books, I think we can call this a success. Of course, if I manage to do that and you don't know about the Irish books yet. Although it should hardly come as a surprise that our longlist prediction video has Irish books on it. Right. According to the notes left by Past Me, book number 10, or whichever number it ends up being. The missing book is called The Dream Hotel by Laila Lalami. That sounds nice. Oh, no, not nice. It's about a woman who returns from a conference abroad to the United States, and she is arrested at the airport by the Risk Assessment Administration because their algorithm has analyzed her dreams and found that she is at high risk of committing a violent crime against her own husband. And so she is taken to a detention center for observation. Whenever one of the dreamers break one of the many, many rules of the center, they get time added on to their sentence. And so the months go by until one day someone new turns up at the center to shake things up. Well, that sounds depressingly relevant in an age where we rely more and more on algorithms and AI to make decisions for us. And you can already be arrested for the crime of planning certain crimes. Well then, I shall send you back to past me. See you there. And you might wonder if you have kept up with where all these books are from, that I managed to mention 12 books and not a single one of them was Irish. That's because I saved them from now. I now have 3 Irish books coming. That's another difficulty. You know there's always going to be Irish books on the list, but probably not more than 2 or 3. So anyway, these are the 3 that I ended up with. First, a debut, Confessions by Catherine Airy. An American teenage girl who is orphaned after 9/11, or at least her father is one of the missing after 9/11, is contacted by the estranged family in Ireland that she didn't know that she had and invited to come and live with them. And we then follow 3 generations of women as we find out what happened to make part of the family go to the United States and what happened to make them not speak to each other. And by all reports, this is an excellent, excellent book. The second one, I think, is also a debut. I don't have too many debuts on this list. I think I only have 3, maybe 4. Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. In this book, a woman makes a decision to grab her 2 young daughters, put them in the car and drive off and leave her husband. And then follows the problem of navigating how to find somewhere to live and look after her daughters, while her husband campaigns relentlessly to get her back. Because, as the blurb says, leaving is one thing, staying away is another. And I'm not sure when exactly this is supposed to be set, if it is in the time before or after divorce became legal in Ireland. But either way, it should be interesting. The third Irish book is not a debut at all. It is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Now, I have a confession of my own to make. I have never read a Sally Rooney book. She has been longlisted before for the Women's Prize, and I think it was in 2018 with Normal People. And from what people who do read Sally Rooney have said, Intermezzo is her best book to date. Which makes me think that it's far from impossible that she should be longlisted again. And maybe that's a good time to start reading Sally Rooney. All I know about it is that there's a family drama involving brothers, which would make a nice change from all the sister family dramas I read last year. And then finally, book 16. And this one is a long shot again, I think. In part because it's a book of interconnected short stories, and I'm not sure how fond of that the Women's Prize is. The book is called Behind You is the Sea, written by Susan Muaddi-Darjai, and it is a generational drama set in Baltimore. We follow a couple of Palestinian-American families. And this is another one of those books that have some serious topics, but is also supposed to be kind of funny and warm, and a book to challenge stereotypes. And I think, considering that the Some days it seems like the US has open season on Palestinians. I think it's important that Palestinian voices are heard and that stereotypes are challenged. So that's my 16 books. Wonder how many, if any, I get right. I do hope that the long list contains at least some books that I have already read, whether it's the ones that I put on my personal list here or not, because we only get 4 weeks, 29 days, to read all 16 books before they announce the shortlist, which seems like entirely the wrong way of doing this. We get 2.5 months, almost, to read the 6 books on the shortlist, but they only give us 4 weeks to read the 16 books on the long list. Reverse that. So if the long list contains 16 books I haven't read, then I'm not going to kill myself trying to get them all done in time for the shortlist. But we'll see. Exciting times anyway. And while we wait, we have the non-fiction list, and pretty soon we'll have the international book year as well. That's it for now. Ta-da!